Yes, good morning. It's Monday, the 17th of August 2020. Welcome back to another week of the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. I'm your host, Pete Fairbairn, and as always, joined by one of the top journos in the country. Today, lucky enough to have NRL.com's Brad Walter on the line. How are you, Brad?
Yeah, I'm really good, Pete. Had another great weekend of sport and looking forward to another week of some massive news in the sporting world.
Mate, there's absolutely massive news. There's plenty going on as all the football codes near the finals. Of course, across the A-League, Super Rugby, AFL and NRL. And we're going to start in the NRL. We're going to start in Wollongong, where you are, with the reign of Paul McGregor coming to a close at the St George Illawarra Dragons. Pretty emotional scenes for him on Friday night, with the Dragons upsetting premiership frontrunners Parramatta 14-12. And whether you've been a fan of McGregor during his tenure or not, nice to see a man with such close ties to that club leave on a winning note. Obviously, a bit of things to pass or things to come yet there. But I want to know, Brad, what are you hearing about what's next for Paul McGregor, and how do you think his tenure should be remembered?
Well, I think so. Obviously, Paul McGregor's going to have a bit of a break now, as he said at his press conference. He's been inside the bubble for 13 weeks. He hasn't been able to see his dad, who's in hospital, so he's done that, and he's taking some time out down the coast. But he wants to coach. He didn't really go into detail about that, but I know that he wants to coach again in the NRL. He feels like he's got 7 years' experience. He's coached over 150 NRL games, and he's achieved some success. Albeit the last 2 seasons haven't gone great, and ultimately it cost him his job. But I think we could all see on the weekend that the players really love him. The players in his team, certainly had their support, and yeah, he will be looking for another job, whether that's an assistance role at a good club or another head coaching job. But I know that he does want to remain in the game, and I think he does have plenty to offer. He has that experience. I think he's a really good man manager. He developed the team that the Dragons had, that in 2018 went on were leading the competition for 18 rounds, and the state of origin and some injuries took their toll, but they still only went out two games from the grand final. So that was a really good season for him. That was obviously the peak, and they never really recovered from the loss of Jack DeBell and Gareth Widdop and some other players, Lisa Armau, Jason Nightingale. Their squad just wasn't quite the same. But I think that his reign deserves to be remembered for what they achieved in 2018. And I think that'll hold him in good stead for another job somewhere in the NRL, as I said, whether that's as a head coach or in some other sort of role.
And also worth noting, of course, that Paul McGregor's had one hand tied behind his back this year in regards to the selection panel. 3 members selecting the team, which is pretty unprecedented in the NRL. Also, from a recruitment perspective, he didn't head that up at the Dragons either. So while the call's been made to move on to a new coach, the buck doesn't entirely stop with him. We'll see whether Dean Young is capable. I know he's very highly rated internally at the Dragons and within the game. Certainly we'll see what he's able to do with that squad over the next 6 weeks in what appears to be a bit of an audition for the permanent role. But the spectre of Paul Green probably looms fairly large, as well as somebody who, his agent has already suggested he would be interested in going to a big club like the Dragons. And as a premiership coach, somebody who's likely to be in the mix as well. We'll stay with NRL. Their second story, that first one coming from Dan Walsh at NRL.com, and our second story today coming from Phil Rothfield in the Daily Telegraph. It's a bit of a sad one to read. Anthony Seibold, the Brisbane Broncos coach, who of course we know is currently in quarantine, having had to leave that COVID bubble for personal reasons, isn't able to coach his team at the moment as they kind of surge from one poor performance to the next. And Seibold's told Phil Rothfield that nobody in the game from the NRL has reached out to make contact with him, inquire about his well-being and see how he's going. We know that Seibold's taking advice and working with the police around some of the rumours that have been circulating about his personal challenges through social media, and that he wants to really draw a line in the sand for what's appropriate and hold people responsible, I guess, for what they say on social media about him. He refers in this article to faceless cowards on keyboards hiding behind anonymous accounts. He said he'd hate for any other coach or player to go through what he's had to this last week, and at some point as a game, we need to take a stand. Do you think it's disappointing, Brad, that nobody at the NRL has reached out to Anthony Seibold to check on his well-being?
Well, I believe that the NRL has reached out to the Broncos to see whether Anthony Seibold, needed some help or what they could do, and they've spoken to the Broncos about that, and I'm sure the Broncos are offering as much support as they can to Anthony Seibold. But it's a very difficult situation for Anthony Seibold. It's one that no one should have to go through. I have seen some of the text messages that were sent around that were circulating that he is taking legal action against, and they're vicious and they're damaging to his credibility. And Anthony Seibold left the bubble for personal reasons, and people, they may think that he's not doing a good job at the Broncos, or they might not be happy with the team's performance, but they've got to understand that he's a person like the rest of us. He's got issues going on his personal life, and it's something, as I said, he shouldn't have to be subjected to that. And I think it's really good that he's taken a stand and he is getting lawyers involved, and hopefully something will come of that. We saw Ryan Pappenhausen, amongst other athletes, speak out last week about death threats and the type of abuse that players are subjected to, which is shocking, on social media, etc. So I think whatever support the game and the clubs can give to coaches and players, personally, I think it's something that we all need to support Anthony Seibold and anyone else who's copying this sort of abuse.
Yeah, well said. I think the point around separating, your opinions or your views on his performance as coach. Obviously, we know the Broncos aren't travelling well, and the buck stops with the head coach in this instance a fair bit. But at the same time, it doesn't give anybody an excuse to defame his character, and hopefully he gets whatever support is required. And if people are found to have done the wrong thing, that they're held to account with that. Our third story today, really good news and a bit of a coup for the Australian Women's Rugby Sevens program, as reported by Georgina Robinson in the Sydney Morning Herald, with 2016 Rio Olympic gold medalist Chloe Dalton re-signing with that program for another year to help Australia win back-to-back gold in the postponed Tokyo Olympics next July. Good news here, of course, because Chloe Dalton has made a successful transition into the AFLW with Carlton, played 2 really, really good seasons down there in Melbourne. She initially left the Rugby Sevens program, I think 2018, and was just looking for a change and an opportunity to take on a new challenge. She's also played elite basketball before she played Rugby Sevens, and she went and played a sport she'd never played before in AFLW. But Women's Sevens coach John Manenti was able to coax her back into the Australian Sevens fold, with the Olympics looming, and the plan was always for her to go back to the AFL after that. She's a massively important player for that team. We've seen her playing in the Jock Scott Cup in Sydney in recent weeks for Warringah in the fullback jersey there. And we know that she, at her best, she's one of the top half a dozen players in that Australian Women's Sevens squad. But also great to see her have the opportunity to go back to the AFLW in 2022. In general, Brad, are we going to see more female athletes playing multiple football codes, such as the AFLW, NRLW, and rugby as well?
I think in the short term, because there are issues around the competitions, like the women's sevens team are unable to play, and we've seen there's people like Charlotte Caslick is coming over to NRLW, and there'll probably be some other players as well, because it's an opportunity for them to be able to play. But I think in the longer term, athletes are going to have to make a decision, like Elise Perry did several years ago, where she had to choose between cricket and soccer. There's a lot of crossover athletes. There's a lot of female players, who are good at multiple codes, and as professional or semi-professional women's sport has grown, there's been opportunities for them. But as these competitions expand and become, longer seasons, more full-time, more money involved, I think players are going to have to make a decision. But in the short term, even the Rugby Sevens program itself, and the NRLW or the Australian Jillaroos program, for example, they're looking for more matches and more opportunities for their players. And I know that they've even had discussions. There's been discussions between Rugby Australia and the Jillaroos about the possibility of them playing like a sevens or a nines game or something, that just to give those players some sort of competition. I don't believe it's not going to happen, but I know that's the sort of thinking they're looking. People are looking outside the box, looking at opportunities to prepare their players. And look, that's the great thing with Chloe Dalton. She's going to be able to go and play AFLW. I think her kicking game's improved doing that as well, and she'll still be part of rugby sevens program for the Olympics, and and I think that's the plan with Charlotte Caslick as well. She'll play in the NRLW this season. She's still going to play. Her aim is still to go to the Tokyo Olympics.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, obviously, with the NRLW such a short season, the AFLW pretty short as well. That being said, the World Rugby Sevens series, when that's back up and running, that's a pretty brutal slog over 8 or 9 months of competition. But great to see some thinking on their feet, I guess, from these different codes to deal with the challenges around COVID and around the rescheduling of the Olympics. And as I say, great news for the Aussie Sevens to have Chloe Dalton locked in. Our penultimate story today, we stay in the Sydney Morning Herald, and it's a story from Andrew Wu. He reports about a meeting between the Australian Cricket Council. Now, the Australian Cricket Council was a body which was set up after a damning review into the game in 2018. It consists of the chairs of the state and territory associations, the Cricket Australia chairman Earl Eddings, and the Players Association boss Greg Dyer. They haven't met very regularly, but they have met over the last few days to discuss rescheduling the summer of cricket that's ahead, bringing the 2020 and one-day internationals against India forward to late November, early December, and then pushing the test series against the visiting Indians back so that it would run right through until the back end of January. In general, Brad, do you think this kind of flexible approach to fixturing and the fact that this Australian Cricket Council was able to get together and work as a unit here potentially, does that signal a new, mature approach to governance in Australian cricket?
Well, I think it represents a body that's starting to look at, what are all the options? Because of COVID and the issues, the hurdles, the obstacles that's thrown up. It's really important that sporting bodies are flexible and that they look at trying to put content on however they can do it. And we've seen that with the winter sporting codes, and now cricket is looking at that as well. And I think it's a sensible approach that, if they need to flip their calendar, that they do that. They said they do whatever it takes, and they try and obviously maintain their marquee games like the Boxing Day Test in Melbourne if they can make that happen, and they just build the calendar out around that. And whether that's the first test, for example, to start the test series against India, and we play the one-dayers and the 2020 games before that. Just basically whatever works so that they can get other nations here, get India here to play and get content on so that, hopefully they can have crowds and to give us something to watch. But yeah, I think it is, they need to be flexible, and it's good to see that they are thinking, again, as I said, thinking outside the box. We talked about Tennis Australia looking at last time I spoke to you about looking at various options, and it's exactly the same thing. It's just, it's like having a blank sheet of paper and figuring out, okay, what are the obstacles and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, good to see Interim Chief Executive Nick Hockley having an impact in that role, pretty immediately. And I guess collaboration is going to be the key there for a sport which has had a pretty fractured 6 months. And, we've obviously seen the departure of Kevin Roberts as Cricket Australia CEO, but just in regards to the different states and territories and how they work with the national body, you need everyone singing from the same hymn sheet. And similar to rugby union, where we've seen almost the pandemic that sport needed to have, perhaps that'll be the case in cricket from a governance perspective. Our final story today, and we look at the World Game and the Champions League, and Brad, pretty massive that for the first time in 24 years, there will be no English or Spanish sides in the Champions League semi-finals. Manchester City knocked out by Lyon in Lisbon over the weekend. And there's also no Italian teams. We've got 2 German teams and 2 French teams. We'll see Red Bull Leipzig, a football club who's only 11 years old, which is pretty remarkable. They're in action against Paris Saint-Germain Wednesday morning our time. And then we'll see Bayern Munich, probably the front runners at this stage, against Olympique Lyonnais on Thursday morning Australian time. As we go back and have a look, Atalanta, Atletico Madrid, Barcelona and Manchester City, the 4 big teams knocked out at the quarterfinal stage in recent days. Obviously, we know the Champions League's changed to a single knockout tie this year as opposed to usually being over the 2 legs. That's as a result of the COVID pandemic, and all those matches have been played in neutral venues in Portugal. But as we look at the size of the teams that have been knocked out, do you think we've been robbed of fair outcomes with those matches being a single leg?
No, I think it's turned the Champions League into like a final series that we're used to watching in NRL, AFL, Super Rugby, because it's these games, the finals are played at neutral venues. You lose and you go home. So I think it's certainly changed the format and the structure, and I think that's we've effectively seen upsets because teams just have to get out there and and win once, and that's all that's required. And they're also you're in a neutral venue, so you're not having to go to go to Manchester or go to Barcelona to play those games. It's created a different style of football, and it is it's a game where where the underdog team can come in and they just know we've just got to win this game and we've got to do whatever's necessary. Whether we've got to defend or whether we've got to go all out and try and score goals. So I think it's definitely changed the format. I personally prefer it. We get teams in the home and away league where they're just trying to defend a result that they got in the other in the previous game, and and they'll win on an aggregate. So I think this is a much better system, and I also like the fact, and there's no doubt it's changed it, where the tournament is played, like a final series. So you win one game, you progress to the next game a few days later. It's certainly a different type of Champions League, but personally, I think it's more exciting and more interesting, and it brings it more into line with the type of final series that we have in other sports, particularly here in Australia and over in the USA.
And I mean, it's not like Manchester City didn't have their chances. They didn't show up and play particularly well, but Raheem Sterling misses an empty net, which would have made it 2-2 on the night with about 15 minutes to go, and it's a completely different scenario. As for Barcelona, well, that football club's going to need to almost go through a rebuild, which is unheard of for a club of its size and stature, but they were single-handedly demolished by Bayern Munich. 8-2 was the score there. There were shades of the Germany 7-1 over Brazil at the 2014 World Cup about that one. Brad, fantastic to catch up with you as always. Thanks for all your insight and your extra information that you've been able to provide. Is always so appreciated, and look forward to having you back on the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff again very soon.
No, thanks again for having me, Pete.
Good stuff. You've been watching and listening to the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. We'll see you tomorrow with Nat Ioannidis. Cheers.